The snow came early that year, shearing across the high plains like a white scythe, relentless and cold enough to blister skin. Horses bucked against the wind in their pens, and fences groaned beneath the weight of ice that formed like veins in the wood. It was the kind of winter that found the weak and finished them. Cullen Hart's ranch had already been bleeding since August. The cattle were thin, their ribs sharp as fence rails, and two hands had left when the feed ran out. He fed the remaining stock hay he couldn't afford and slept in the barn most nights, too stubborn to give up and too broke to hire help. His father's name still clung to the land in rusted iron letters on the gate, but the bank didn't give a damn about legacy. They wanted payment, in gold or bodies. He was forking frozen manure out of the horse stall that morning, heatless breath fogging before his face, when something thumped against the barn's side door. Not hard. More like a knock too weak to matter. He paused, the pitchfork still in his grip, then moved slow to the door and opened it against a blinding wall of snow. She stood there barefoot, her skin gone pale blue and lips cracked to bleeding. Her hair, soaked and twisted, clung to her face like seaweed dragged from a river. The hem of her dress was torn and crusted in ice. There was no coat, no gloves, no sign of sense or direction in her eyes. He didn't ask her name. Didn't speak at all. Just stepped back and let her fall forward into the straw and dark warmth of the barn, where she curled like a wounded animal and passed out cold. By noon, he'd gotten a fire going in the stove inside the house and laid her out on his bed under every wool blanket he had. She shook hard for hours, and he half expected her to die. Her hands were raw, her feet a blistered mess. Somewhere along the line, he washed blood off her legs, the sort of blood he'd only seen when a woman lost a baby or tried to make one go. She never stirred. When she woke, it was night. He was sitting on the floor near the stove, chewing jerky and staring at the boards of the ceiling like they might tell him what to do. Her voice scraped out of her like something clawing free of a box. "Where am I?" "Wyoming," he said. "Closest thing to it, anyway." She blinked. "You the owner?" "I'm the one left," he said. She coughed into the blanket, a wet, hacking sound. "You saw me." "I did. And you brought me inside. You were dying." A silence stretched, long and taut. She shifted, winced, and held her stomach like it still ached. "I can work," she said. "You don't need to." "I do," her tone turned sharp. "I earn my way, always." He didn't argue. He just watched her a while, noting the way her hands flexed, how her eyes kept drifting to the shadows by the window. She was afraid of something still out there, and maybe it wasn't the storm. That night he gave her a knife and told her to sleep with it close. She didn't ask why. She just nodded and tucked it under the pillow. In the morning, the snow began to let up, though the wind hadn't. He found her standing near the stove, wrapped in a wool shirt of his that hung to her knees. Her face had color again, and her voice was steady. "You married?" she asked. He shook his head. "You got anyone coming to take care of you?" "No." She studied him a long time. "Then marry me." Cullen blinked, then squinted like he might have misheard. "What?" "You need help, I need protection. We marry now, it solves both." "That's not how it's done." She raised an eyebrow. "You want to wait till spring and court me with flowers. You don't have time, rancher, neither do I." Cullen stared at her. She wasn't beautiful in the usual way. Her face was narrow, her cheekbones scarred, but her eyes, they burned like cold fire, steady and fierce like she'd been forged in something harder than iron. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Willa." He didn't ask for a last name. She wasn't offering one, and he figured she'd buried it for good reason. They stood before the hearth while the wind howled, and Cullen said the words from memory. No ring, no preacher. Just her hand in his, rough and small, and the truth of the vow in the silence that followed. "I'll make coffee," she said when it was done, and that was that. The snow let up by afternoon, revealing the world half drowned in white. Cattle lowed in the distance. Somewhere beyond the canyon, a crow called once and flew off. And Cullen, now a husband to a stranger, felt the wind shift like the whole earth had just turned on its heel. Willa wore his dead mother's boots. They were cracked at the seams and stuffed with wool, but they fit well enough. By the end of that first week, she'd shoveled out the shed, boiled every blanket in lye, and shot a coyote that came sniffing at the smokehouse. She didn't flinch from blood, didn't complain about the cold. Cullen caught her once in the early morning, standing shirtless in the snow behind the barn, scrubbing her skin with handfuls of ice like she meant to scrape something off more than dirt. When she saw him watching, she didn't speak, just kept scrubbing. They didn't share the bed. She took the floor by the stove, arms folded tight, eyes open long past the time he fell asleep. She asked no questions and gave no answers. But she listened. She'd watch him work the cattle chute or fix fence posts, her gaze sharp. And soon she was there beside him, sleeves rolled, hammer in hand. He taught her to saddle the roan gelding that had never taken to strangers. She rode him like she'd done it since childhood, one hand firm on the reins, the other resting on her thigh where a pistol might have gone if they'd had one to spare. It was the second week when the tracks showed up. They came down from the North Ridge, where the trees thinned into a shallow pass. Boot prints, two sets, deep enough to be fresh, one pair larger than his own, the other narrow. They veered toward the river, then circled back, watching. Cullen found Willa cleaning a rabbit by the pump, her sleeves red to the elbow. "We've got company," he said. She wiped the blade clean on the snow and stood, her jaw set but her hands didn't tremble. "Did they come to the house?" "No, not yet." She glanced at the horizon. "They will. You know them." Her silence was an answer. Cullen dragged an extra load of firewood inside that night and pulled his old shotgun from the cellar, though it hadn't been fired since his father's funeral. He laid it by the door. Willa didn't ask questions. She sat by the window after dark, shoulders stiff, watching the woods like they'd done her a wrong that needed correcting. 3 nights later, the barn door swung wide just past midnight. Cullen was out of bed before the wind even caught it, shotgun in hand. He moved slow, quiet, down the stairs, stepping around the floorboards that creaked. Willa was already at the back door, coat on, knife in her boot. She didn't look at him, just nodded once and opened it. They found the roan horse bleeding from the neck, its eyes wide with terror. The other horses were spooked but untouched. The cut had been deliberate, deep, surgical. "They're warning us," Willa said. Cullen crouched by the carcass. "They know your name. They know worse than that." By dawn, the body was burned, and Willa had taken an axe to the small hill behind the barn, clearing line of sight to the pass. She moved like someone trained for siege, stacking wood high, breaking branches, dragging stones. She fashioned stakes and buried them at the paths that led up to the house. Cullen said nothing. He worked beside her, following her lead. He knew this was no longer about the ranch. This was a battlefield, and she'd fought this war before. That night, Willa finally took the bed. She didn't ask, just climbed in beside him, knife in her hand. "They won't stop," she whispered. "Tell me who they are." She stared at the ceiling for a long time before speaking. "I was promised to a man in Idaho, years ago. He had money, land, 2 brothers who kept him in power. My family wanted peace, and they sold me for it." Cullen turned his head, watching the way her throat moved as she swallowed. "But I ran. On the day we were to wed, I set fire to their grain stores, gutted a horse, and rode through the flames like a demon." She closed her eyes. "They came after me, 3 of them. The youngest died in the canyon 2 weeks back. The storm took him, the other 2. She didn't finish, she didn't need to. Cullen stared at the ceiling too, listening to the silence. The storm had passed, but the danger had only changed shape. They were married by necessity, but something in the silence between them began to harden to root. Not love, not yet, but something older. The knowledge that both had nothing else left in the world, and each had chosen to stand beside the other. Outside, the trees were black against the snow, and far off in the dark, a wolf howled once and went quiet. By mid-December, the ground was stone, the wind a whip. The snow no longer fell, it scoured. Yet Willa worked the land like it owed her something. She'd patched the barn roof, stitched new reins from salvaged hide, and begun training a feral colt that no one had been able to ride, not even Cullen's father in his prime. She fed it by hand, broke it with whispers, not force. Some mornings, Cullen found her asleep in the stall with it, cheek against its flank, pistol under her coat. They spoke little, but they learned each other's silences. Cullen came to know the tight way her mouth set when she was thinking of the men still out there. Willa learned the look in his eyes when he watched the sky too long, worried not about snow but time, how little of it they had before spring, and the debts that would return with the thaw. One evening, while digging out the shed doors, Cullen uncovered a trap buried in ice, not one of his. It was newer, iron teeth slick with something dark, blood not yet frozen. "They're close," he said, tossing it aside. Willa touched the blood with 2 fingers, then tasted it, slow and deliberate. "Too fresh for game," she said. They armed themselves more thoroughly. Cullen's old Winchester was cleaned and loaded, every shell accounted for. Willa carried a small derringer she'd hidden in the lining of her coat, 2 bullets only, both etched with something in a language Cullen didn't recognize. "They won't take me alive," she said. He didn't argue. He just nodded and tightened the strap on his holster. Then came the man with the dog. He appeared mid-morning, out by the frozen creek, leading a greyhound with a mouth full of metal. He wore a brown duster and a hat pulled low, and when he saw Willa and Cullen at the ridge, he lifted a gloved hand in greeting like they were neighbors meeting by chance. They didn't wave back. He didn't call out. Just stood there long enough to be seen, then turned and vanished behind the tree line. The dog stared at them until he was gone, then followed, silent as smoke. That night they boarded the windows. Willa poured lamp oil across the threshold and kept the matches close. Cullen set traps near the livestock pens and loaded the shotgun with buck. "You ever kill a man?" she asked. He thought a long time. "Shot one once." "Don't know if he died." She didn't nod or speak, just looked at him like she was measuring the weight of that memory and whether it would be enough. The attack came 4 days later. They set fire to the far shed first. Smoke curled over the ridge in the pre-dawn stillness. Cullen woke to the smell of burning wood and the crack of flame against ice. He ran to the window and saw shapes moving through the trees, 3 men, one with a lantern, one dragging something heavy behind him. Willa was already by the door, her coat on, eyes wide but steady. "They want us out," she said. "Won't risk a bullet in the dark." "Then we don't give them daylight," Cullen said. They took positions, Willa at the back porch, Cullen by the barn's hayloft window. The fire spread slow, fed more by snow than dry wood, but the smoke was thick, acrid. It forced them to breathe through cloth, coughing into the sleeves of their coats. One of the men stepped into the clearing, rifle loose at his hip. Not young, not old. His face was angular, eyes sunken. The kind of man you'd expect to see staring down from a wanted poster. "Willa," he called, voice hoarse but smooth. "Girl, we've come to bring you home." She didn't answer. "We don't blame you for running. That was just the storm talkin'. You come now, it'll be like it never happened." Cullen watched her from above. She didn't move, didn't even blink. The man waited, then sighed. "All right," he said. "Have it your way." A shot rang out, clean, sharp. It missed Cullen's head by less than a foot, tore through the rafters. He ducked, returned fire. The buckshot hit tree bark, maybe flesh, maybe not. Then came the dog. It burst from the underbrush with a sound like tearing canvas, metal jaw snapping. Willa shot it mid-leap, the derringer's report barely louder than the dog's yelp. The second bullet hit its spine. It fell, twitched once, died. Then she ran, into the trees, low and fast. Cullen shouted, but she was gone. Gunfire erupted. Men yelling, a scream, then silence. He waited 5 full minutes, heart pounding, before venturing out. He found one of them dying in the snow, guts half spilled from a gut wound. The man tried to raise a pistol. Cullen shot him through the head. Willa emerged 10 minutes later, dragging another body by the arm. Her coat was soaked, her cheek split open. "That's 2," she said. "The third ran east." "You hurt." "No worse than before." They buried the bodies deep and poured salt over the graves. Willa burned the dog's corpse herself. "They'll send more," she said. "We'll be ready." She didn't speak, just leaned against the barn wall, blood freezing in her hair, eyes dark and far away. Cullen moved beside her, not touching, not asking, just standing close enough that she felt him there. The wind picked up again, cold and bitter, but the silence between them was no longer a void. It was a pact. Winter didn't ease. It deepened, turned cruel. The ice thickened on the troughs, and snow drifted shoulder-high against the north side of the barn. The world shrank to a single rhythm: wake, work, watch, wait. Willa marked every sunrise like it was a warning, not a gift. Cullen worked the line fence in double layers, fingers stiff, shotgun slung low across his back. The bodies they'd buried stayed down, but the land remembered. On the 12th night after the fire, a letter arrived. No rider, no trail. Just a folded sheet tucked beneath a stone at the edge of the porch, smeared with ash and sealed in wax too soft for the cold. Willa read it once, then again, mouth a tight line. When she handed it to Cullen, he saw the words scrawled in a hard, practiced hand. "You took what was never yours. She was ours before she could walk. One brother dead, another maimed. You'll give her back, or we'll take more than cattle and fences." It wasn't signed, but the smell of tobacco clung to it, and something older, like scorched bone. "We need to leave," Cullen said. Willa shook her head. "This is where they'll come." "That's how I want it." He stared at her. She stood in the center of the cabin, one hand on the window frame, watching the tree line like she could summon them faster. "Why here?" he asked. "Because if I keep running, they win. They're used to people folding. I want them to bleed for every step." She turned then, finally meeting his eyes. "You don't have to stay. I didn't marry you to leave." She didn't smile, but she looked at him a long time, like she saw something she hadn't dared to name before. Then she turned back to the window and said nothing more. They spent the next days preparing for siege. Cullen tore up the floorboards near the hearth and built a hidden crawl beneath the cabin. Willa wired bells to the fence posts and strung broken glass across the tree line. Every night they rehearsed fallback positions: barn, cellar, creek. Every night she checked the pistol at her waist, even if it hadn't moved an inch. Then, as January came, something changed. They began to speak, not long conversations, not soft, but real. Willa told him how her father drank himself blind and offered her hand to a man with silver teeth and oil-rich land. How the man's brothers watched her like meat, how they measured her hips like cattle stock. How she ran the night after he put his hand around her throat and said, "You'll learn." Cullen told her of his mother dying during a snowbirth, the child still inside her. Of his father drinking to forget it, then forgetting the fence line and dying under a steer that shouldn't have been in the wrong field. Of how Cullen buried them both alone, no preacher, no song. "I've done more burying than living," he said. Willa nodded. "Then let's stop the count here." One night she came to him in silence and lay down in the bed without a knife. She touched his chest like it was ground newly thawed, unsure if life still ran beneath it, and he let her. No promises were spoken, no names beyond their own, but something was built in that quiet, a bond not born of fire or fear, but of shared rot, shared blood. The third man returned in the dark of the moon. They heard him before they saw him, a breath too heavy, a twig snapped deliberate. Cullen was on the porch before the man reached the steps. Willa was behind him, rifle leveled. The man stopped just past the first bell line. His hands were raised, coat flapping in the wind, no hat. His hair was slicked back, eyes sharp and sunken. "You kill my kin," he said. "They came to kill her," Cullen replied. "She was promised. Not to you." Willa stepped forward then, rifle trained on his chest. "I was sold, and I burned that debt to ash." The man grinned. "They'll come," he said. "Not me, not now, but soon. And they'll come hard." Then he turned, slow and confident, and walked back into the trees. Cullen could have shot him, wanted to, but Willa did lower the rifle, and something in her stance said let him go, let him bring the rest. That night she sat at the fire and stitched her name into a scrap of cloth, just her first. She didn't explain, just folded it twice and put it under her pillow. "When they come," she said, "there won't be another letter, no mercy. No warning." Cullen nodded, he understood. There are winters that bury the weak, but this one would break the strong. They came before dawn, 6 of them this time, no shouting, no warning shots. Just figures moving through the black trees like shadows with rifles, silent as hunger. The bells rang once, high, metallic, then were cut. The cold muffled everything. Even the gunfire felt distant. Cullen was in the crawlspace, rifle braced through a slit he'd carved weeks before. Willa was in the barn's loft, her silhouette low against the hay, pistol steady, shotgun slung across her back. The men moved fast, too fast for amateurs. 2 flanked east toward the smokehouse. 1 circled behind the creek. The rest fanned out across the ridge, staying just out of clean shot. Willa picked the one by the feed bin, waited for the wind to lift the corner of his coat. Then fired once. He dropped without sound, folding like wet rope. Cullen saw another near the pump, took him through the thigh first. When the man crawled, cursing low, Cullen finished it with a second shot. The blood soaked through snow like spilled ink, but the others didn't scatter, they kept coming. The sky turned gray as steel. A horse screamed, one of theirs, shot or loosed, they couldn't tell. Smoke began to rise from the chicken coop. It burned fast, dry wood igniting like paper. Then Willa moved. She dropped from the loft and landed in snow up to her knees. She was gone before Cullen could call her name, disappearing between the outbuildings, low and quick, knife drawn. She took one by surprise near the well. He turned just in time to catch the blade through his throat. His body dropped backward, rifle spinning out of reach, but another came behind her. Cullen saw it unfold, fired from the crawlspace mist. The bullet skimmed bark, whined past. The man lunged for her, catching her coat, dragging her down. They struggled in the snow, violent and sudden. Willa fought like a cornered wolf, biting, kneeing, driving her thumb into his eye. But he was big, fast, got a hand around her neck. Cullen was out of the crawl in seconds, running, rifle abandoned. He reached them as the man drew a knife. Willa, half-choked, eyes wild, saw Cullen approach. "Move," he said. She dropped. Cullen swung the butt of the shotgun into the man's jaw. Bone cracked. The man staggered, dropped the blade. Cullen fired from the hip twice. Chest, then gut. The man dropped without ceremony. Blood sprayed hot against snow. Willa gasped, pulled herself upright. "You're bleeding," Cullen said. She looked down. Her shoulder was torn, not deep but messy. "Not bad," she said. "One left." They found him behind the barn, young, shaking, rifle dropped in the snow. He raised his hands. "I was hired, didn't know who, didn't ask." Willa stepped forward. "You followed orders." He nodded fast. "Don't," Cullen said quietly, but Willa didn't stop. She stared at the boy. He couldn't have been more than 19, and her face didn't change. "You came for me," she said. "You'd have dragged me back." "I wouldn't have." She shot him through the leg. He dropped, screaming. She knelt beside him, pulled his face close. "Tell your buyer," she whispered. "The girl he bought died in that canyon. What came out's got teeth." Then she stood and turned away. Cullen didn't speak. He just watched the boy crawl, blood trailing like a ribbon behind him. The fire at the coop died on its own. By midday, they'd buried the rest. No markers, no prayers. Cullen cleaned Willa's wound with whiskey and bound it tight. "You'll scar," he said. "I always do." That night they burned the last of the old hay, cleared the blood from the yard. Snow fell again, light, almost soft. The air had changed, not warm, but less cruel. They didn't speak of the bodies. They didn't speak of what came next, but in the silence a new shape took hold. Not peace, not yet, but the first inch of it. The boy would carry her name to whoever still waited in the dark, and Willa would be ready. Spring came slow, like a wounded thing crawling home. The thaw began at the creek, where ice split and ran in ribbons beneath the banks. Trees woke one by one, casting shadows longer than before. Snowmelt turned the trail to mud, and bones buried deep began to rise. Cullen rebuilt the coop. He didn't speak much while he worked. He moved with purpose, same as always, but something about him had settled, like a man who decided to live, even if the world didn't yet agree. He planted early this year, carrots and beans, maybe a patch of corn if the frost stayed gone. He cleared the east field, too, said he might fence it in come May. Willa walked again by then. The shoulder wound had closed, red and raised, and she moved with the weight of it. Not pain, just memory. The letter never came. Neither did more men. Instead, a man rode in one morning from the south, hat in hand, boots polished like a banker. He didn't cross the fence line, just waited at the edge, respectful. "I'm here for a name," he said when Cullen met him. "The family back in Boise, they've stopped sending men. Some say she's dead. Some say she turned wild. Either way, they need the story finished." Cullen didn't answer right away. He looked back toward the house, where Willa stood just inside the porch's shadow, shotgun at rest. "She ain't property," he said. "I didn't say she was. You came to write a name on a stone." The man nodded. "Then write your own," Cullen said, and walked back toward the barn. The writer didn't return. That night, Willa burned the last of the letters. Not just the one from the snow, but others, scraps Cullen hadn't known she'd kept. Names, threats, a wedding contract, scorched at the edges. She burned them all behind the barn, watching the ash drift like smoke signals into the dark. Then she came back inside and cut her hair. No word about it, no gesture. But Cullen saw the woman she'd been before, the girl who'd run in the snow, go with it. That summer, she broke the colt. Rode him past the ridge and down to the canyon alone. When she returned, her hands were blistered and face flushed with heat, but her eyes were calm. "You go to the canyon?" Cullen asked. "I left something there," she said. "Don't need it anymore." She didn't say what. They planted that fall together, worked in quiet, sharing tools, sharing breath. The bank sent another letter, but this one came with respect. Men don't write threats to people who bury 6 bodies in a winter. By winter's return, they'd built a new room on the cabin, smaller, facing east. Willa filled it with dried herbs and tools she'd carved by hand. Cullen dug a deeper well. Neither of them spoke of love, but they spoke of next year, of winter stores and calves to come, of what crops might grow stronger now that the soil had tasted blood. Once, in the cold before dawn, Cullen woke to find Willa sitting by the stove, the firelight soft on her scar. She held her knife not for fear but familiarity and stared into the embers like they told her secrets. "You still waitin' on something?" he asked. She looked up, not startled, just quiet. "No," she said. "Just remembering." Then she stood, crossed the room, and lay beside him. The wind outside groaned through the pines, old and restless, but inside the fire held, and Willa slept without her knife. And Cullen, for the first time in years, didn't dream of dying.